This is John Strong. You're listening to Soccer Made in Portland.
Welcome Timbers owner and president, Merritt Paulson.
This might take away your Merritt Paulson tweets segment.
No, we already did the Merritt Paulson Twitter update just to make sure we got it in. Garth Lagerway, Real Salt Lake general manager.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
An interview that we did with Kenny Cooper.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for the kind words.
Jim Rylett, he is the Timbers U23 coach.
For whatever reason, you have Kelly there because he's really not very good at what he does.
Opinions, yes. Factual information, that remains to be seen.
That's never stopped us before.
Speaking, Kelly McLean is here on the North American Soccer Network. Kelly, good morning, and what's going on?
Good morning. Not a lot. I have I kind of got kneed in the knee in my game last night, and it's kind of bothering me. So if I'm grimacing a little bit as I sit in the chair or adjust or whatnot, that could either be from the Timbers game over the weekend, or it could just be a little soreness from the knee.
You got to play through, Kelly. You just got to play through it.
Yeah, exactly.
Today is July 24th, 2012, and there's actually a game tonight, friendly, between the Timbers and Aston Villa Football Club of England. Of course, we're going to have Mat Kendrick on in the back half of the show. He is the beat writer for the Birmingham Mail, covering Aston Villa. He has been traveling with the team throughout their U.S. trip this week or over the last week and a half in Philadelphia and Chicago. And so he's going to give us an update on sort of what's going on with Aston Villa and why are they here. And I wouldn't say it'll be a proper preview because it doesn't really matter what happens in the game, but just for a little bit of background on the club and sort of what's been going on with their trip. So that will be, about halfway through the show, a little after that. The first thing, though, we're going to do is talk about the Timbers' disastrous loss. I would sound like a broken record saying that. But before we do that, just a couple of details about the show. The best way to keep up with everything is to go to nasn.tv. We've got a show page there. Trevor posts all of the old shows, so anything archived going back. I think this is our, 56th show? And so you can catch all of the previous episodes in iTunes format through RSS feeds if you're not an iTunes kind of a person. Some of them are video. All of them are at least audio. And you can sort of track back if you want and sort of see what you're doing. And yeah, if you do happen to be driving back from Portland to Philadelphia for the All-Star game, then you can pretty much listen to every single show we've ever done. I don't know if I'd recommend that, doing that continuously. I wouldn't do it. But if you want to pick out any of the individual shows, they are there. We're on Twitter at SoccerMaidenPDX. We have a Facebook page as well, and you can like that, and the shows get posted there. And you can always rate the show on iTunes. That helps us out and also sort of helps keep track of who's listening and from where. And quickly, I felt like this was appropriate. This day in Timbers history, July 24th, 1976, the Timbers lost 3-0 to Dallas Tornado. I believe Kenny Cooper's dad was, Kenny Cooper, was still the goalkeeper that year. He definitely was the year before. And interestingly enough, the Timbers have never once won on July 24th. I think they drew in 2007 or 8 against Carolina, but other than that, I think they've only played 4 or 5 times on July 24th, and every single time was a loss, except for one. Now, we should turn back a couple days, which was not July 24th, it was July 21st, and the Timbers, of course, were destroyed at the hands of FC Dallas, who we should remember was the worst team in the Western Conference, and has been for most of the season. 5-0 was the score. There are a few talking points, of course, but we should start with our predictions. Only Trevor was confident enough or stupid enough to make a prediction based on the result. He said a draw, which I actually didn't think was too bad of a prediction. That, of course, did not happen. Both of us went with ideas of squad rotation and who exactly we thought would not be in the lineup. You were correct, 100% correct. Darlington Nagbe would not start. He did not. I said David Horst and Mike Chabala would start in place of Stephen Smith and Fudi Dansu, and I was right on Chabala, but Horst did not come in, which I was a little bit surprised about, but there were a couple of other changes, which we'll, of course, talk about.
Yeah, and that leads us, right into talking about that starting lineup, back to a 4-4-2. We saw a lot of changes. So Chabala was in there for Smith. Alexander was in the center midfield with Chara. Jewsbury was out. No Nagbe, Mwanga and Facito up top, and Alassane Sango out wide.
No Boyd.
And no Boyd. So, yeah, I mean, what were your thoughts on, that lineup going back to the 4-4-2? What did you think of the decisions to whether it was performance-based or squad rotation? I don't know. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much said that this was going to happen. We outlined a number of players who could possibly sit. And I think I even said that we probably wouldn't see all of the changes that we mentioned, but we would see at least a few. And we basically saw all but one. I mean, we said we thought Smith would be out for sure. You said you thought Jewsbury would be out. You said you thought Nagbe would be out. I said I thought Boyd might be out. And I said I thought Footy might be out, and he wasn't. So those were the changes. So I'm not surprised. I mean, we knew this was coming. And like we talked about on Friday, whether it was squad rotation, whatever that means, or if it was performance based, it almost didn't even matter. We knew there were going to be changes. There were, without going too far ahead, and we'll obviously have Friday to talk about the next match. I'm very curious to see how things look next Saturday or coming up on Saturday against Chivas here at home, because we keep hearing about accountability for performance, and we've heard about squad rotation, and those are either going to come together and into a complete blow up of the lineup and total changes, or a bunch of guys are going to get another chance, which would sort of go against the idea of performance-based punishment. I don't know if they're going to just sort of wipe the slate clean and just pretend that never happened and kind of go back to other things. But, people have been clamoring for a long time for a lineup not featuring Jewsbury, where Troy Perkins was the captain. So they got that. People have been wanting to see, or some people anyway, certainly not everyone, but a lot of people wanted to see what Alexander could do playing in the middle. Got to see that. People have wanted to see Sango and Al Hassan playing together out wide. Got to see that. You get Mwanga back in a 2-forward look instead of playing up top by himself, which we sort of had criticized. We got to see that. Chabala back there. Smith's been terrible. We get to see that. And none of it really worked. I don't know if any of those replacements hadn't been made. If the other, if Smith would have been just as bad as Chabala, if Jewsbury had been there instead of Alexander from the start, would that have played out in the same way? Or it's obviously impossible to go back and say for sure, but something tells me the squad rotation, whatever that means, didn't really have any impact on what happened. I think it had more to do with the sort of game plan, and then in some ways actually executing the game plan, which actually led to failure.
Well, I was most disappointed, I think, that they went back to a 4-4-2. I really wanted to see when the lineup first got announced, I was just ecstatic because I saw Chara and Alexander's name there right next to each other. And that's what I had wanted to see, that 4-2-3-1 with those two guys in there. I was disappointed that they went back to the 4-4-2. I think there's a number of players that work better in that 4-2-3-1. And I know that we first saw that against LA, and there was, a lot of reasoning to have these two sort of defensive central midfielders to help out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a defensive, formation. And I think Chara and Alexander could work in that formation, even though Alexander isn't what anybody would call a defensive center midfielder. I just think having both of those guys back there, we know what Chara does, and Alexander could have a bit more freedom within that role. I would really like to see that previous formation with the same players that we saw in Dallas. And I don't know how much we can take from this because nobody played well. I mean, it sounds kind of weird, I guess, to say that maybe this is a one-off game because they've lost 4 in a row, and that, it seems like it's in the same mold of the way things have been going. But I don't know. I mean, getting destroyed 5-0, I don't know. On some level, you can say that it's a bit of a one-off. Obviously, guys were not playing particularly hard, at least in certain instances. I don't think you can say that there were guys that just flat out never gave any effort and quit the whole game. But there were clearly guys that quit on particular plays, or, for a stretch, maybe it was 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. You could just tell they were not giving as much effort as they could. And sort of on that respect, like you said, on some level, I think you do kind of say, forget about this one. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, nobody showed up to play. Guys were quitting left and right. I don't know if you I don't know if you can really say that Chabala shouldn't be in there instead of Smith because of that performance. I don't know. You could say that about anybody on the field. I don't know that we really learned anything from this game other than that things are as close to rock bottom as they could be if they're not at rock bottom.
Yeah, at least as close to rock bottom as they have been. Things could definitely get worse. I mean, they could lose to Chivas and Dallas again at home. I mean, that would be worse than it is now. But yeah, I think the setup, and we talked about this on Friday as well with Buzz Carrick, and the idea that Portland might not necessarily try to play hard in some ways. They might not try to press. I wouldn't suggest that they're particularly known for pressing, although, as you pointed out, they sort of did against Chivas in early in the game, in the previous game. But we sort of knew from the outset they weren't going to do that. I mean, Gavin Wilkinson pretty much said that the plan was to sort of conserve energy and not sort of chase after Dallas. And I think I said something along the lines on Friday of, that's ridiculous. You might as well go for it because of the heat and the humidity and the differences in that kind of stuff. They're going to be dead at the end of the game, if not way earlier than the end of the game, no matter what. So why not go for it and try and get something out of the game instead of basically allowing Dallas to dictate the terms of the game? And not just because the execution on the goals or what have you was better from Dallas than what Portland was providing. Just in general, Dallas dictated the game throughout. And our friend Daniel Robertson, who hopefully we'll have on the show previewing the Dallas game coming up, had a nice graphic to sort of illustrate the way in which Dallas just sort of chose to play the way they wanted, and pulled the passing stats just from the back four, the Dallas back four. And the number he came up with, I don't know the specific number, but basically the back four alone for Dallas had more passes in the game against Portland than their entire team had in their win against Colorado, last week or a week and a half ago, whenever that was. So, they basically, without anybody pressuring up the field, and that's even with two forwards up there to possibly run around and chase. You've got midfielders available to to push up and pressure, with Portland basically stepping off every player. And the best example of that is Chabala stepping off of David Ferreira on the second goal for Dallas. He's giving him all kinds of space. Okay, he doesn't want to get beat. He doesn't want to get burned. I understand that. But, no pressure whatsoever. Or the, I forget which goal it was. I guess maybe the third, where Chara is standing near, I guess it was Jackson. And he's just sort of standing near him. And Jackson, kind of loads up to send a cross over to the left. And we don't even need to talk about what Al Hassan was doing on that play. Or we can, but not even mentioning that. Chara's just kind of standing, generally in front of him. I mean, he's not allowing Jackson to just shoot straight ahead, but there's absolutely no pressure. He doesn't even stick his leg out to even pretend to try and block the ball going out wide to the left. It's just that approach made no sense to me. And when you sort of go into a game saying, the coach is saying in public, we're not going to pressure the ball because we're going to save our legs. Well, save your legs for what? What's the point in doing that if there's nothing to save it for? I mean, before you know it, they're down 2-0, 3-0. I mean, there's nothing to come back from. And they know if they go down 1-0, the game's over. They're not going to win. I mean, maybe they can draw, but they're not going to win in an away game. So I just thought the whole approach was utterly pointless. And I just don't understand. I get it sort of logically. We don't want to overtax ourselves, so we're not going to over pursue. We're not going to over press. But that doesn't mean you don't press at all. It doesn't mean you don't put any pressure on the ball, period.
Yeah, I don't know that I have too much of a problem with the approach. I just can't help but wonder if it was the execution, if somehow something got missed in the translation between sort of exactly what you just said, that we're not going to overpress. We're not going to come out and play like we did the first 10 minutes against Chivas, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to press or put pressure on guys anywhere on the field. I mean, I just can't help but wonder if the message was give them their half of the field. And if the back four want to rack up 350 passes between them in their own end of the field, let them. But as soon as that ball crosses the half line, well, then we're full on pressure all over the field getting after it. And just watching that, it just seems like the whole message got lost. Like what they heard was, oh, we're not going to press at all. We're not going to expend any energy. And that's just kind of ridiculous. At least that's the way it looked. So I don't know that I have too much of a problem with saying we're going to try to conserve a bit of our energy and maybe not press as much as, we might at other places or at home or whatnot. But I don't know. Either the whole message was we're not going to press at all, or the message of we're not going to press in their half and then we're going to step it up, when the ball crosses the half line, that message got completely lost, or guys just decided they weren't going to do it at all. I don't know. But yeah, it was just odd. It was guys not putting pressure on the ball all over the place and quitting on certain plays, and it was just a complete debacle. I mean, in every way. But I think your point of, why not just come out and play? In this instance, the worst thing that could have happened is you come out pressing Dallas all over the field in 90-degree heat. You wear yourself out by the 60th minute, and then they play right through you and beat you 5-0. I mean, what's the difference? I mean, it happened either way. I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, that's kind of what happened against Salt Lake. I mean, the Timbers, not that they were overly pressing, but they were playing, they were legitimately playing in that game. And then they got to 60 minutes and they started to fall apart a little bit, and then Salt Lake just totally punished them. That isn't great. Obviously, it got John Spencer fired, but that's a little bit more acceptable to me, and I think to most people, than what happened in Dallas. And it doesn't really help that this happened in Dallas last year. Now, I think that the team on the field on Saturday was probably better overall in terms of talent than the team that went out against Dallas, fairly early in the summer last year. But they've gone to Dallas 3 times, and they've given up now 10 goals in 3 games and scored 1. And I think it's probably fair to say if that game, the 1-1 draw, hadn't been in March, they probably would have gotten killed in that game too. I mean, it's just, I understand heat is a major problem. I don't like when it's hot. I don't like to do stuff when it's hot, but too bad. I mean, that's part of the league. I mean, you don't just get to play every game in 60 degrees and drizzle. That is part of it. And that just can't be the excuse that it's just going to be so hot that we just can't even function. Well, even if the other team's used to it, more used to it, they're also playing in terrible heat. And it's not, I don't know. Everything about sort of what happened, and then all of the chatter afterward, and I don't mean like the internet chatter. I mean from from Gavin, from Jack Jewsbury, from whomever, just makes everything even more confusing. And I think as bad as the performance was, I think what we saw and heard from within the team in terms of quotes to the media makes it even, I don't know about, not worse, but maybe explains even better what is actually happening with this team. Because I think if you just look at the field, it just looks like, nobody knows what's going on, but partly that can be explained. It's a new coach. He's trying to do a new system. He's, rotating the squad, whatever. These kinds of changes happen, and sometimes teams react well. Sometimes teams react poorly to coaching changes. Okay, that sort of stuff kind of falls in line with other examples in other sports or other teams or whatever. But this stuff about, sort of talking about players quitting, and I mean, I don't know who asked the questions. I mean, obviously it was in Dallas. I'm not sure who was there covering, but who was asking the questions? Did players quit? And then guys basically saying, well, yeah, they did. Not we did. Yeah, they did. And it just, so that's some stuff I want to talk about. And in particular, so I referenced Jack Jewsbury. And not that we have to be totally done with talking about the game, but I think this is important to talk about, because this is something you mentioned to me the other day. We kept hearing over and over and over during John Spencer's tenuous second year, as things went badly, and anytime things went badly, we always heard, especially from guys like Jewsbury or Perkins or whatever, everybody's behind the coach. There aren't factions. Nobody's splintering off. Nobody's, the locker room's not divided. We're all in this together. We know that when we lose, we have to pick ourselves up as a team, and all these, a bunch of cliches, but we always heard that message. And we haven't been hearing that message since that coaching change happened. And obviously the Timbers have now lost 3 games in a row since the coaching change. It's been bad, obviously. And so of course people aren't going to be happy, but when Jack Jewsbury says, we don't want guys splintering off, we're not going to start now, right after he said, oh yeah, we watched the video and there are definitely guys quitting. Who is he talking about? Those other guys on the field, are they, who do they think he's talking about? Is it me? Is it you? Is it him? Is he talking about all of us and he just didn't say we? That, I think, is sort of, we can't read the tea leaves too much and say there definitely are splinters in the locker room, but there's obviously something going on there, and it's not just because things are going badly on the field. There seems to be some sort of confusion as to whose role is what, and who should or shouldn't be pointing the fingers and all that kind of stuff.
Well, even back to last season, I forget, in the summer, I think there was a stretch, a winless stretch of, 7 games or 8 games or something. Even back to then, we heard the same sort of thing. Jewsbury would say, I've been on teams before where we've gone through bad stretches and the locker room gets a little bit divided here and there. And he said, this isn't happening in Portland. This is a good locker room. And I think the people who are around the team and in the locker room after games and stuff, I think believe that. And I think it was true. And we've heard it, one or two more times early on this season. And for the most part, I think people would buy that. And people who are media who are around the team on a consistent basis, I think would agree with that and say that that's a fair statement. I just don't know if you can keep saying that. I mean, you can't go through a stretch like this in your second season, have your coach fired, have the turmoil continue, face say, "Oh yeah, we're all fine in the locker room. There's nobody pointing fingers, or there's no divisions in the locker." I don't think anybody's going to buy it now. It's ridiculous. I just don't think you can say that. Of course there is. Anybody who's been on a team that's gone through something like that knows that, the honeymoon period, and the love infest only lasts so long. And I think it's run its course. And I don't know that we should continue to hear remarks like that when just anybody's going to know that it's not really true anymore. And another thing that I keep saying is especially after yesterday's sort of press conference and it came out in the media about Gavin's quotes, and Jewsbury had quotes in there and stuff about Gavin throwing people under the bus. That seems to be a really common phrase that I keep reading out there. Do you think Gavin's throwing players under the bus? I mean, what do you make of his comments, particularly from yesterday, that, people did quit, yada, yada, yada? I don't know. What do you make of that?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, the throwing under the bus thing, I think is a long-term thing on the part of fans who have been around the team for a while and feel like Gavin maybe has thrown players under the bus in the past, whether that's verbally in the with comments in the press, or by just like taking guys out maybe when they didn't warrant it, or whatever the different instances are. I think it's a longer term thing than just this 3-game stretch. So I think now that phrase is coming back out because people are saying, well, he's always thrown people under the bus, and that includes in that line of reasoning John Spencer. He's saving his own job by firing John Spencer when in reality he's to blame for the player acquisitions, blah blah blah. And you can make that case. There's some validity to those arguments. I mean, obviously, we're seeing him do even worse with the assembled players than his predecessor did, in terms of results on the field. But I don't know. There's also part of me that thinks that John Spencer, while he was very blunt in certain circumstances, also never really told the whole truth about what was happening, and partly because he liked to deflect things. And we talked about this a lot, especially early in the year, or even in the off season, about how one of his things was when things were going badly, he wouldn't say, for the most part, "Oh yeah, that guy was terrible," or whatever. He, for the most part, he would say, as a coaching staff and as a team, we need to improve on these things, and we know that there are, these different areas in which we need to work and whatever. And then when things were going really well, then he kind of would praise individual players. So he kind of was, his approach was different than Gavin Wilkinson. And I think, in the positive, it's, when things are going well, it's good to highlight players and make them feel good for their contributions and whatever. And when things are going badly, I think Spencer's idea was it can only hurt a guy's confidence if you call him out in the press. Now, sometimes he did it in veiled ways, call out Khalif or James or Perlaza or things like that. And we've chronicled that as well. I think Gavin's approach is different. I think he, whether it's in response to the way Spencer was, or it's just his own natural style, he seems to be very comfortable saying things are terrible. We're embarrassed. This is embarrassing. Players quit. That's, the organization will not stand for that. That's not going to make players feel very good, but it may be a more honest assessment of what's actually happening. I mean, I think it's pretty difficult to look at that game and say, Oh yeah, that was a 100% effort. That was as good as the Timbers can play, and they just got beat by a better team. That's not, that's not really to say players were quitting, to say things are going terribly, to say everyone's embarrassed and this team is embarrassing the organization and everything. That's harsh, but it's pretty true. So if that's throwing players under the bus, I get that. I mean, the reason someone would say that is because he's not taking the blame. He's saying, well, they're embarrassing the organization, and he's including himself in the organization instead of the team in terms of the performance. And he threw a few caveats in, but I understand that. But it seems pretty clear he's not going anywhere. So I guess for me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it doesn't really matter who cares if he's throwing players under the bus. I mean, his job it doesn't appear to be dependent upon the results in these games. It seems like he's going to be here being the general manager for the 2013 season, no matter what. So I guess, I don't know. To me, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't really have a problem with it because I think anybody who watched the game knows that there were instances where guys just weren't giving a full effort. I mean, call it that they quit or they weren't giving 100%, whatever you want it. Anybody who watched the game knows that. I watched the game. I know it. Gavin watched the game. He knows it. I don't have any problem with him saying it. It's like, I mean, everybody else would watch the game, say it, think the exact same thing, and then for some reason want to vilify Gavin when he says what everybody knows. I mean, I would be angry if he didn't say it. If he was giving a bunch of cliches and trying to gloss over it and not make a big deal about it, I'm totally fine with him saying what was readily apparent that everybody saw. I don't see any issue with that at all.
Is he culpable? Yes. I mean, he is not independent from the performance of the team, and he's far less independent from the performance of the team than he was in his previous role just as general manager. Before, you could say, well, he assembled this team on in some working relationship with Merritt Paulson and John Spencer, and it was Spencer's job to get these guys to do whatever, and they're not doing it, and blame lays on Spencer for that on some level. So he's obviously now stepped into that role. So he does have blame for not being able to motivate these players for whatever reason. I mean, they've looked basically lethargic and terrible for the better part of the last 3 games. I mean, they had some nice moments against the Galaxy, obviously, but they've also said time and time again, it's easy to get up for playing games at home. So that would suggest to me it doesn't have anything to do with the coach. So yeah, he's definitely at fault, and I don't think if you asked him, he would say, "Oh yeah, those players suck," and I mean, I think I'm doing a good job, and they just don't get it. I don't think he would say that. I think there's a built-in resentment towards Gavin that as things keep getting worse and worse, or stay bad, whatever you want to put it, that resentment will just intensify. But what's the alternative right now? I mean, glossing it over and pretending things are okay? No, I mean, that's not going to work. A new coach isn't going to come in tomorrow. They're not going to fire Gavin. I mean, people have sort of asked had a question in the chat box about, is this Merritt evaluating Gavin and deciding whether or not to fire him? I mean, I've been wrong on predictions before, but I'll say it flat out. He's not going to fire Gavin. He doesn't want to. Every single statement that comes out reinforces the idea that Gavin is an integral part of the front office. And that he's part of the decision-making process. And we can talk about this Merritt Paulson tweet it and delete it thing really quickly as well. Not that that's new, but this particular statement, Merritt says, some blame when times are tough. If he'd been more empowered, I doubt we'd be in this position now. There are a lot of things to talk about that, and we don't even have time to approach most of them. But in the line that we're talking about, he's basically saying Gavin Wilkinson is forever part of the front office. I mean, he's like, this is not a sign that Gavin his job's on the line, people want to think Gavin's job is on the line because they want another change. Now people are, we always like to talk about revisionist history on this show, whether it's Lavelle Palmer's natural position or any number of other topics. But now this line that's out there about, well, what apologizing to John Spencer for all the bad things they said. Clearly, none of this was his fault. It's obviously always been everything bad about Gavin, and then that poisoned the well from the beginning, and all this. Like, maybe there's some truth to that, but not to the degree that people are talking about it. And this statement from Merritt Paulson just reinforces the idea that Gavin Wilkinson is at the heart of this organization, and that's not going to change. It's just not going to change. And now there are other directions to go with it if you want to touch on that.
Well, I don't know. I agree with you. I don't think Gavin's going anywhere. He's integral. But here's a topic that has come up quite a lot, not just right now, but even back to last year a little bit. This idea of, is it a talent issue? Is it a coaching issue? Is it a management front office issue? Is it a player acquisition issue? I'm curious where you would say the issues lie. And obviously the easy answer is to say, well, it's a combination of all of those things. But I don't know. If you were pressed to say where is the problem, or to somehow sort of say one way or another about what the biggest issue is, where would you go with it? Because this is something that a lot of people are talking about. There kind of seems to be two schools of thought, about whether or not it's a talent issue or the coaching issue. Where do you kind of fall out?
Well, you took my first answer, which is a combination of all of them. I think there are two different ways to look at it. I think there's the short-term way and the long-term way. I think the management issue is in the long-term way. So I'll do the short-term way first. I think it's definitely a talent issue. The team can be good and has also shown times where it's terrible. And teams that are actually good, that have talent across the board and depth, don't have multiple games where they're terrible. Everybody has a game now and again. Seattle is usually pretty good. They went to Montreal and were terrible. We've seen, other teams just be horrendous when we know they're actually a good team, and the rest of the results show that. Yeah, Trevor mentions LA completely just falling apart in the Champions League last year. Everybody knows that they are very capable of being a good team. They don't suck, but sometimes you do. The Timbers suck a lot. It's not just sometimes. They do a lot, and it's not. To me, coaching is a problem. It was under John Spencer. It clearly is now. With Gavin, there's a coach search. Like, there's going to be some kind of a change. That hasn't helped what talent there is on the field. People are constantly changing positions. The lineup is constantly being changed. You could say poor decision making in terms of tactics or substitution patterns or playing time decisions. That has contributed. But I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that the players just aren't good enough to overcome some of those other hurdles. And I think if the players in general were better, some of these issues, the players could kind of get together and say, look, yeah, we can kind of work through this as players, we're actually the ones on the field. So let's, and there's something to that I think we don't really see with the Timbers. Obviously you're hamstrung by being an expansion club on one sense, because you have to acquire players through drafts, with beat expansion or super draft. So you're just not going to get a really great solid team. Look at Salt Lake. They were terrible their first couple of years, and it took a while to sort of build up that process where they could get some established guys who'd been in the system for a few years. They changed coaches as well. So I think it's too early to say on some of that stuff. So that gets to the management issue. I think that the Timbers' biggest problem is that the owner is also the president. So right now, the decision-making process, there are two people who occupy the positions of coach, general manager, scout, team president, and owner. I don't think there are enough voices in the room. I mean, if there's, if people want to make an argument about Gavin Wilkinson being fired, they should suggest that Merritt Paulson hire a team president who is an independent voice. It doesn't have to be someone who's opposed to everything Merritt or Gavin wants, but who's just another person to focus on things in a role that is above Gavin but below Merritt. And I think there's just a lot missing. I mean, we know Gavin does all the overseas scouting. He's obviously going to need some help on that. We know Amos does most of the collegiate scouting. But, those are guys who are active members of the front office and the coaching staff. I mean, they just are jamming tons of responsibility into a very small number of people. And I think that has contributed in some ways to the decision-making processes that we've seen. But in the longer term, it doesn't allow for flexibility. It doesn't allow for variation of thought or idea. And the hiring of the next coach is going to be done in consultation with Merritt Paulson and Gavin Wilkinson, the same way it was for John Spencer. So that isn't automatically bad, but I think there's just a big gap in sort of front office leadership folks that the Timbers are really lacking compared to other clubs in having people in positions to make decisions and to help address some of the coaching and talent issues in ways that the club, I mean, obviously they made this coaching change, so that's why it's especially bad right now with only 2 voices in the room. But how can you run a club with 2 at the most 3 voices making all of the soccer related decisions? It just needs to be wider than that, and I think that could help some of those shorter term issues.
Good points. I like that you kind of pointed out the short term versus long term, the differences between those. I think I ultimately, if I've got to weigh things, I don't believe that it's a talent issue. Again, some of that is because I know they've got some young players with potential. There's that word again. And that it's going to take some time, and there's some differences in expectations there. But when I get right down to it, I don't honestly believe that it's just a straight up talent issue. Are there some places where they need better players? Absolutely. But I really like a lot of the players that they've got on this roster, starting with Perkins in goal and, going up top to Boyd and the prospects with, Mwanga and Valencia down the pipeline, hopefully. I just think it's growing pains. I think it's being an expansion team and going through some of this stuff and acquiring players in a number of different ways and just getting some guys some experience playing together and getting some consistency, which now is, taking a hit because we've fired a coach and we've got an interim coach. I think it will come around. I don't think they need drastic changes to their to the players that they've got. I think it'll work out. There's growing pains. There's going to be some ups and downs, some bumps in the road, and this may be the lowest of the low, but I think that's kind of what it takes to get there.
Yeah, agreed. We're going to take a break now, and we're going to bring in Mat Kendrick, and we're going to shift gears a little bit and stop talking about all of the issues surrounding the Timbers in whatever way, and talk a little bit about Aston Villa and this friendly coming up tonight. So bear with us for just a minute. We'll bring Matt in, and we'll be right back. Back as promised, and as we mentioned at the top of the show, we're very happy to welcome Mat Kendrick to the show. He covers Aston Villa FC, Birmingham Mail, has spending the last week or so in the United States with the team tour. And Matt, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, guys.
So let's just start. In the past, Villa's been to Asia, been to Portugal, preseason tournaments and tours and whatnot. Why did Villa decide to come to the US this year?
I think they've been to the States on several occasions as well. I think obviously with them having an American chairman, I think it's an area of the world that they want to kind of, they can see it's an emerging place for soccer or football, and they want to try and grab a little piece of it. I think I've been amazed during the last kind of week or so, quite how popular Aston Villa Football Club is in these parts, be that with expats from back home in the UK who've moved out here, or kind of Americans born and bred who have just kind of, for one reason or another, developed an affinity for the football club, and it's been fascinating to see kind of both sets of people mix and kind of celebrate Aston Villa. I do my job because I love football and I love the sport, but love going to watch the matches. But the fascinating thing of these tours is just seeing how people from different cultures can kind of share their love for the same football side.
So, Matt, so far in the U.S., has Aston experienced a lot of fan support and guys, people in the American cities coming out and buying the jerseys and wearing the scarves and supporting the team really well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've been to a couple of events where they've kind of done meet and greets in sporting kind of retailers, sports clothes shops and things like that, and there's been queues around the block. And when the guys have been walking around, the guys employed by the club have been walking around the towns with the tracksuits on, there's been a lot of interest. People might not recognise the Aston Villa logo and the Aston Villa colours to start with, but it's generated conversation, and even non-soccer fans have wandered over and been interested to hear why the club are here. So yeah, there's been a great level of interest, and there's been quite a few people who have managed to kind of afford to travel here from home as well, use their summer vacation time to come over here. So it's it has. There's been kind of a large amount of support.
How much of a trip like this is a balance? I mean, obviously, ultimately the goal of a preseason tournament or a preseason tour is to work on fitness and try different player combinations and bring in new players and that kind of thing. But obviously there's also the side of, you mentioned celebrating Aston Villa. Is that a tough balance for a club like this to make?
I think the thing that's probably made it a little bit tougher is the fact that it's taken place in 3 locations. So I think the heat and the travelling put together have probably made it harder to get the full benefits from a footballing point of view for the manager and for the coaches. But having said that, the Villa kind of marketing guys you know what I mean, they're pretty shrewd guys, and they've kind of tried to get a schedule that allows the players first and foremost to do what they're here for, which is to get ready for the English Premier League season. And they haven't been too demanding in terms of the public appearances and the community visits that they've done. And in fairness, I mean, Villa bought, I think, a 25-man squad out here, and they've used that squad not only on match days, but also all of the guys have taken it in turns to do the hospital visits, to do some of the commercial visits as well. So I think it's been hectic. It certainly hasn't been. I think today's probably the first time that we've all got a little bit of kind of downtime to go and have a little wander around. It's been fairly kind of demanding schedule for everybody, but like I said, it is a balance, but the football must come first. And knowing the new manager, Paul Lambert, he wouldn't have it any other way. And I don't think he would have agreed to all the other kind of extras if he didn't think it was beneficial to his team.
So has the football been what the team has needed? Has the level of play been where it needs to be to for Aston Villa to get what they need out of these games?
I think so. I think they're definitely heading in the right direction. I mean, it's interesting that I don't know, perhaps half a dozen players have, during the course of our conversations and the interviews that I've done with them, have all identified a slightly different element of the training that the new manager's brought. And it's not as if these guys are on message and they're all being told to say the same thing. They're all kind of honestly saying what kind of particular facet they like of the new manager. And it does seem to have really kind of, it's like a light switch has been flicked really. Aston Villa at the back end of last season was a really horrible kind of, really, the atmosphere was just quite poisonous towards the end. It was a club that was kind of, and then you got fans arguing amongst themselves. Obviously, you're well aware that the previous manager was a very unpopular figure. And for this new guy to come in and kind of click his fingers and change things around so quickly. I mean, we know these 3 new signings that they've already made this summer, but it's more than that. It's kind of an ethos, and it's a kind of a no-nonsense, let's get this sorted out. Aston Villa's too big a football club to go through what happened last season. It seems these players and the supporters, although it's very early days, are kind of buying into that.
As far as tonight goes, I think a lot of people know that Agbonlahor and Bent are not due to some stuff that they picked up in the last game. But who are some guys that are going to be playing tonight that are names that are going to be recognizable to American fans? I mean, people maybe who aren't as plugged into Aston Villa as you are, or hardcore fans are. Yeah. Who's going to be there that people are going to recognize?
In terms of names that you'll know, I mean, obviously you'll know Brad Guzan, who, I mean, Villa fans are generally delighted that he's signed a new deal. It looked like the club were going to lose him, and he's back on board. And I don't think anybody back home thinks he's been given a real opportunity to show what he can do. So he's one you're familiar with. A name that you probably won't be familiar with, but one that you should look out for, I believe, is the new signing Karim El Ahmadi. He's a guy who plays central midfield, who was signed from Feyenoord in Holland several weeks ago, and he's probably the one who's impressed me most pre-season, because he kind of brings an energy and an alertness to the Villa midfield that's possibly been lacking in recent seasons. So I think he's one that you should look out for. Just trying to think. Obviously, who you may be familiar with over there. I mean, Villa have got several international players, so it's a big summer for Stephen Ireland as well. Met him on a community event yesterday. He was doing some wonderful work with some kids at a hospital in Portland, and he was telling me kind of what a big season it is for him as well. He's another guy who came with a big reputation, and although he was much better last season, I don't think Villa still seeing the best of him. So he's another one to look out for this evening.
Well, Matt, maybe we can kind of finish up. Give us a little outlook for Aston Villa coming up this season. When does the Premier League season start, and how generally is Villa expected to do this season?
The season kicks off away at West Ham United on August the 18th, so it's going to be on us before we know it now. It's not too far away now. As regards expectation levels and what we'll see from Aston Villa, it's a very interesting one, because I think that last season was so disappointing for everybody at the football club that, in my view, although there's kind of this bright new era under the new manager, I think that's got to be kept in check. Really, I think the first aim for this season should simply to be better than last season. I know that's a very kind of a very simple way of looking at it, but I think if Villa just aim to do that, finish higher than they did, win more football matches and make it more entertaining, and then I think the second season is a season when Villa fans will really want to know where this manager can take them places. It's only 2 or 3 years ago since Villa were competing towards the top end of the Premier League, and they were competing towards the latter stages of the domestic knockout competitions as well, and they were playing European football. So that's got to be the aim, the ultimate aim. But I think I don't think Villa fans should expect that in the first season. I think the manager should at least be given the courtesy of having a kind of full first season to kind of just stamp his philosophy on the club, put something lasting in place in that first season, and then hopefully Villa will reap the benefits for years to come.
Look to because of the obviously the historic ties and connections the two clubs have had, but it's nice to have a big club come in, recognizable names and faces. So we're looking forward to it. And Matt, thank you very much for your time, and we'll catch up with you at the match. So thanks.
No, that's great. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. See you later this evening.
Thanks, Matt.
And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about things from a Portland perspective for just a minute before ending the show. So bear with us for just a minute.
You left me for another. You left me all alone in the world. Hey,
And we're back. Thanks again for your patience, and thanks again to Mat Kendrick of the Birmingham Mail for joining us and giving us some insight into Aston Villa. I mean, for me personally, this is a big, interesting friendly, just with, as I mentioned, all the historic ties between the Timbers and Aston Villa, but it should be interesting to see some of these guys. I mean, it's a little unfortunate we're not going to get to see Gabby Agbonlahor or Darren Bent because they both picked up injuries against Chicago. But I don't know. What about you? I mean, do you like friendlies? Do you like, without getting too deep into the friendlies, no trophies, friendlies, all that nonsense? What do you think about friendlies?
I like the friendlies. I like seeing these teams come in from various different places, whether it's Mexico or England or whatever. I like it. I enjoy it. I know that it's not going to be this ultra competitive game, and that some of the it's not going to be our best 11 out there. For much of the match, if any of it, who knows? But I enjoy it. I like coming out and getting a look at some of these other players and other teams. I enjoy it, and I know it throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into things, with especially in July when you've got so many games going on and whatnot. But we've mentioned before how how we hear a lot about there aren't enough reserve league games as it is, but then the friendlies come around and people complain. And I understand that people complain because they want to see the starting 11, against some of these clubs that are brought in. But I don't mind it. I like it. I've got nothing else to do on a Tuesday night anyway, so I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I very much enjoy watching friendlies. It's a break from the regular routine as far as what happens at the game at the stadium, and it's toned down a little bit, and it's just less pressure and less intense. I kind of like that. Yeah, and as Trevor said, the Timbers could Timbers fans, but yeah, Timbers themselves could use a little break from MLS, and that's something that I wanted to mention because it is kind of interesting. During that long winless stretch last year, the Timbers had 3 of the 4 friendlies were in that stretch that was so bad in league results. And so I'm not sure this is a fair assessment, but last year the Timbers, in the games that immediately followed friendlies, had 0 wins, 3 losses, and a draw. And 2 of those losses and the draw were at home. So after that, one was DC, which was a terrible game for the Timbers. First home loss in MLS and at Jeld-Wen. The next one was Seattle. That was bad. Gave up, up 2-1, ended up losing 3-2. One was at Columbus, which was a horrible game that the Timbers played, lost 1-0. Footy had an own goal in that one. And then the last one was the Toronto game where the Timbers were up 2-0 at halftime, and ended, that one may as well have been a loss, finished 2-2. So they didn't have a good track record last year in games after friendlies. So
okay, I don't like friendlies anymore.
That was a bad stretch in general. Maybe it was made worse by having a few extra games in there, jammed in amid other fixtures. But I think this is a good time for the Timbers to have a game. In fairness, we haven't been hearing the usual cries about trophies, not friendlies. Now, maybe that's because everyone knows there's no chance of trophies this year, so it doesn't matter. But I actually think this is a good time. Get a little bit of a break. I expect we'll see a handful of starters. If not most of the guys starting the game being sort of regular starters, whatever that means, guys that, I don't think we'll see Steve Purdy starting at right back, but I think we'll see him in the second half kind of a thing. So I expect to see a lot of turnover. I think Villa will use a lot of players. They may sub. I saw Liverpool subbed all 11 players at halftime of their game against Toronto the other day. I don't know if Villa will do that, but I do think they'll have a lot of players playing the game. So I'm looking forward to it. And one other thing I wrote in here was, was there anything to be gained from Portland perspective? And I think at the very least, this is a game that even if they lose, it doesn't count. It doesn't matter. So I don't think it will do anything to contribute to the downward slide, even if the result isn't good. And it just gives a chance to go out there and be at home and get comfortable. The next 2 games are at home. They've got a chance to sort of, they're not going to climb back into the playoff race, but they've got a chance to make the season a little bit more respectable than it is if they can get, these next 6 points at home. This to me is a step toward that. They can put a few guys out there, maybe try something different, maybe go back to something they've been doing before, but there's no correlation between the success or failure of that and results and place on the table. So I think this is a pretty good time, despite the crowded fixture list, to get one of these games in.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it should be fun. Now, we can't sign off until we do a fantasy update because I moved up quite nicely, almost to the first page. I am 51st, but perhaps more importantly, Trevor is free falling, continues his free fall. He's down to 50th, so I've almost caught up with him. And Michael, you fell a little bit down out of the 20s. You're 33rd now.
I did. I had a little bit of a disappointing week. I started well, and then I had 4 guys, including the captain, play in that Sunday game, the San Jose Vancouver game, and they combined to score 11 points. But scored himself. So Yeah, I was a little disappointed in that, but I feel pretty good about the team I've got. I think this was just kind of an off week. I didn't do badly. I just didn't do as well as other people did. So, yeah, I didn't have any Dallas players, so that was one of the things that helped my team. I didn't have any Portland players either, which kept me from sliding, which some other people have Portland players and no doubt slid as a result. So yeah, fantasy always going on. New week coming up. Well, I guess it's not till Saturday. I don't think there are any midweek league games.
I think a Friday game or something.
All-Star game being tomorrow. I think there are no league games during the week, so you'll have another chance to hear from us on that before the next games start. But our top three are unchanged: MD 88 Keys, SLC, PTFC, FTW, and rocking the PDX. It's pretty amazing that they've all been at the top, basically unchanged for the entire season. I don't know who they have and what they do, but nobody's getting a leg up on the other. They're all staying in basically the same spot, and they're just killing everyone else. So, yeah. Oh, and one other thing to throw in there, Matt just tweeted that Richard Dunn is doing gym work today, so he thinks he's probably unlikely to play in the game this evening. That's another name that people will know. Longtime Premier League player, longtime Irish international, played in the World Cup, etc. So anyway, yeah, so game tonight, 7:30 against Aston Villa. Go out and enjoy it. It's been tough to enjoy the Timbers recently, so this is a chance to just relax. You maybe not have to wait in line quite as long. You can just go and watch the game, enjoy Villa. They should be a lot different, a lot more interesting to watch with Paul Lambert as their manager. And we'll be back on Friday afternoon at 3:30, and we'll be previewing the second of this weird set with Chivas USA. So join us then. In the meantime, check out everything on nasn.tv, all the other shows, and of course ours. So until Friday, this is Mal.
And this is Kelly. We'll see you later.
See you then.